Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session. My name is Olivier Lander. I'm the CEO of Global Talent Hub, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. This year, Global Talent Hub conducted a comprehensive piece of research based on the insights of 1,680 managers across Europe and internationally to understand how older workers, particularly those aged 55 and above, are perceived, valued, and supported in today's labor market. And today, we're excited to share the findings with you. Our research uncovered some interesting contradictions. For example, while over 90% of employers praise the strength and reliability of their 55 plus workforce, only 8% actively target older applicants in their recruitment practices. And in terms of demographic shifts, we can see the workers over 55 represent the largest potential labor pool available today. And yet, since 2020, more people have been retiring than entering the workforce, and they're retiring earlier. So this dynamic creates a widening skills gap for organizations already struggling in finding qualified talent. It is an issue that should definitely be appearing on strategic agendas for 2026. So thank you for joining us. Keep your questions coming in the chat, and let's dive into what our study revealed, what it means for employers, and what action leaders should consider next. I'm joined today by a distinguished panel of experts to help me unpack the findings. I'd like to start by inviting each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Audrey, why don't you begin?
Good afternoon, Olivier and everybody. My name is Audrey Cliver. I'm a VP Workforce Transformation at Global Talent Hub and at Alixio Group, and I'm in charge of projects related to skills, strategic workforce planning, talent strategy, and talent management.
Audrey. John.
I suppose I am one of those mid-50s workers. I'm here representing 1080 in the UK. I'm based in London. I had a corporate career up until about 3 years ago, after which I have a new career, if you like, as a non-executive and advisor.
Thank you, John. And Edgar.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Edgar Spieler, and I work as Director of Public and Innovation at Alixio Group, Switzerland. In this role, I'm responsible for research and innovation and driving the business in the public sector. I've been working in the fields of labor market and HR management for more than 25 years.
Excellent. Thank you, Edgar. Great. So, Edgar, why don't we talk through why we chose this topic?
Yes, let me explain. You know, demographic change is shaping the Swiss labor market. As Oli already mentioned, a quarter of the working population is already aged 55 or older. In addition, since 2020, more people have been retiring than entering the labor market. This year alone, the gap amounts to 25,000 people only in 1 year. This exacerbates the shortage of skilled workers. And it will be not realistic to cover this additional demand for labor through immigration, as demographic change is also affecting most European countries. So, how are companies dealing with demographic change? What are they doing to attract, promote, and retain the largest group of older employees? And what else do they consider important? These were the key questions of our research. We have invited HR managers and line managers to take part in our survey and answer questions for the company they work for. These questions are also relevant to us at Alixio Group Switzerland. We notice our outplacement clients age 55 plus often struggle to find a new job. In our workforce transformation consulting practice, we also see that companies promote employees aged 50 plus less than younger employees to take on new tasks and roles within the company. Because demographic change affects most countries in Europe and even most of the industrialized nations worldwide, we decided to conduct the survey internationally with our partner organizations. Our goal is to learn from other countries. So let's move on to the main findings of the survey. Workers aged 55 plus. As mentioned, demographic change is increasing the number of workers aged 55 plus, but how do the HR and line managers assess their skills and potential? We see most companies attest that their employees aged 55 plus have strengths in professional competences, customer understanding, an important professional network, and experience with change. Only in the area of digitalization and AI does only a third of the HR and line managers confirm that employees aged 55 plus have strengths. But overall, the companies say that the employees aged 55 and over strengthen their competitiveness and innovation. So that leads us to the question, what are the companies doing with this potential? How are they using it in the recruitment of new employees, talent development, promotion of working beyond the retirement, and within the generational management? I can already say that there is a significant gap between what companies are doing and what they consider as important in all of these areas. I'll start with the area hiring new employees. The majority of the companies say they hire employees only up to the age of 55 or younger. At the same way, they answer that hiring and training is worthwhile from an employment period of 4 years onwards. So why the widespread age limit of 55? It could easily be over 60. But companies have a different focus. Only 8% say that the company specifically recruits older applicants. However, almost half would consider this important. That leads us to the question, why is this not happening? And what needs to be done to make it happen? When it comes to talent development, we see more or less the same. Just over half say that changing roles within the company is possible even after the age of 55. At the same time, 3/4 mention that the optimal length of time to remain in the same role would be between 4 and 8 years. But then, changing roles should be possible for everyone up to around the age of 60. I mentioned the age of 60 because, at least in Switzerland, the retirement age is 65. But companies should not only make jobs or role changes possible, but also actively promote them. However, there is a widespread lack of talent development for employees aged 50 and over. Why? Less than a fifth offer career assessment and career discussion for employees aged 50 plus. But more than half, additionally, would consider this important. We also asked about various options for the career development of employees aged 50 plus. Options as vertical career development or internal job changes on the same level, let's say horizontal, and adjustment of tasks, a kind of bow-shaped career. Only 1/3 of the HR and line managers say that the company actively promote these forms of talent development for all their employees. In addition, more than 40% again consider it important to offer all these career options as kind of talent development 50 plus. I'll move on to the topic retirement and continued employment. We see that the regular retirement age of 65 is still a strong norm in Switzerland. If there is any deviation from this limit, it tends to be downwards. While a third of companies encourages early retirement, only a quarter offer work beyond retirement age. However, due to the shortage of skilled workers, it should be exactly the opposite. Let's move to the last topic, the generational management. Only a third of companies encourages discussion of the views and needs of different generations and critically reflects on their own pictures and prejudices. However, half of those consider this discussion to be important, and rightly so. This would encourage companies to be more open to hiring older applicants and promoting the talent development, the career of older employees. In summary, it would be important for the companies from a business perspective to hire employees at last until the age of 60 and to promote changes in functions and roles within the company at least at the age of 60 as well. When it comes to recruiting, the companies would consider it important to focus more on older applicants, specific talent development for the over 50s, and the promotion of working after retirement age are also considered as important by the majority of the companies. In addition, companies would like to make generational management more active. That leads us to the interesting question, why only a minority of companies are doing this so far? Well, these are the key findings of our survey, our study on workers 55 plus.
Fantastic. Thank you, Edgar. Thank you for the summary and the points. I think the idea is that we'll ask each panelist, you included obviously Edgar as well, to give your opinions on each of the key findings, and we'll go through in order. So this is where effectively you can bring interesting country differences, your own thoughts as well, in particular from your own careers and where you've been. Discuss whether legislation in each country has an impact on the outcomes and strategies. So let's move firstly to the first topic, effectively that we have, which is hiring strategies and talent development. So let's roll that out. Let's go to you, John, maybe to start, to get your inputs and your thoughts on this particular topic.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult topic because most companies operate, particularly for their more talented employees, a model which is basically up or out. So if you think about it, if you're a manager, you're going to be managing a handful of people. If you do that job well, those people are, after a few years, able to take your role. So you need to be accessing the next role in order to give them room to develop their careers. And there comes a limit, if you like, of where that as there are fewer roles, as you get further to the top of an organization, there are fewer roles to occupy. So it's only natural that the people beneath you are going to want to, are seeking that promotion, are seeking that advancement. Now, it's slightly different from a manager versus specialist, and I noticed that about the report when I read it. I think it's easier to maintain, if you like, to stay in a role longer term if you are a specialist, an expert, if you like, rather than if you're sort of part of the career structure of the firm. I think if you have a specialist skill, which is less mainstream for the firm, there are pockets of excellence where older workers do exist, certainly, but I think in the mainstream, it's an up or out model. And actually, I think that when workers get to be older, they actually want to do things differently. They want to work differently as well. I, for example, didn't want to work full time anymore. I know a lot of my colleagues were looking for longer holidays, more flexible conditions, working 4 days a week, as their needs change when they get older. And then we talk a lot about that with younger workers, but we don't talk about that with older workers.
Indeed, interesting, huh? The up and out piece, and obviously you said, I think the flexibility or the change in mindset of what individual older workers actually need. So I think that's really an interesting point. Audrey, from your
in the
perspective,
UK, most people meet their peak earnings around their late 40s.
Okay.
So they're possibly too expensive as well in their 50s. The other things bear in mind.
Interesting.
Yes, maybe come back and there's indeed a significant gap between the ambition of for hiring people over 55 age and over and the reality. And yes, what we see here in France or in the French debate is that companies set up ambitions, policies and strategies to retain people over 55 or 58. But after when they have to implement, for example, some transformation project or reorganization project, they often include some measures such as additional benefits for retirement or early retirement programs to enable earlier departure. So even though the government incentives were abolished a few years ago, we still see those kind of programs and measures in agreements. And these measures, one thing, what is important is that these measures satisfy all stakeholders, either employees, union, and employers. So, and it's understandable for everybody. And if you have a look on the national statistics from the National Institute in France, what I see is that the projected activity rate for people between 60 and 64 will continue to increase, but at a slowly pace for the next 2 decades. And we should go to 58% around 2040, and after it will remain the same level. Okay. So regarding talent management, this situation often lead to, yes, what you say, John, is upper out. So we often people over 55 often leave the companies, but after companies hire so younger people, which skills are more adapted to the function or the jobs we have in the companies. So we have these two elements, and considering this situation, what we see here is that we have a significant trend in France that is increasing over the last few months. And it is that many companies wish to stop this situation, which lead to significant stop and go and costs. This is very expensive to do that. People leave, and then we have to hire back some people. And that's why they set up some initiatives, a lot of companies based on training, reskilling programs to adapt the skills of people to companies' needs and strategy. And we see that companies believe in that kind of programs on anticipating the future, reskilling people, and proposing to employees some career paths to develop their career and the professional skills. And for me, it's not just a small change. It's really a shift in the culture of companies that want to develop a new model focusing on long-term skills development.
Interesting. Very interesting. And I think it's an interesting balance between what you said, John, and what you said, Audrey, as well, in that whole context of development, skilling, upskilling, reskilling, those type of topics, looking at the gaps, effectively, that might be there. What about from your point of view, Edgar? You know, from the Swiss perspective, how does that resound with you as you see it?
Yes, we see in Switzerland as well that companies promote more early retirement than working beyond retirement. And I'm always wondering that not all companies, maybe the majority not, understand the impact of demographic change on the labor market. They are not aware that, for example, a quarter of the employees are still 55 plus, or this gap between retirement and entering into the labor market. And they are not aware of the numbers and the exacerbating skill shortage. That's one important point. And let me come back to the study. We saw in our survey, for example, only half of the companies say that they use inclusive recruitment practices. That will mean half do that not. And I think, okay, maybe the generation 55 plus needs sometimes as well a mind shift, but the companies need it also to focus, for example, more on skills than on diploma, and really to use inclusive skill-based recruiting practices. And regarding to talent development, I'm convinced that it's very important that we should establish a new understanding of career to promote and to establish a talent development 50 plus with the different career options, and not only the focus on the younger in the advancement of the career, but also for them they are interested in working part-time, or as John said, taking longer holidays. So that needs more flexibility from the side of the companies as well. So there, a mind shift will be really urgent. Otherwise, they don't will get the employees and the skills they need in the future.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the elements also is that we see that talent development programs, for example, are very much generated at the beginning or the front end of people's careers and the younger population, but they don't necessarily come into play for the I would say the 50 plus generation, because your experience, you've got the experience, you're there, etc. But we forget those elements. So maybe that's something maybe to think about. Just conscious of time, want to make sure that we get all these points in as well. So if we move on to the next topic, which is the retirement age topic, and I think this is another pertinent one I think that comes into play here. If I start, maybe I start with you, Audrey, just to see from the perspective of France and how this plays into it, and then we'll go a little bit around the table.
Yes, well, what you see here is that very few people remain employed after the age of 62, unless they don't have the required quotas to receive the full retirement package. So the extension of working life requires to rethink working conditions and jobs for the second part of the career of people, because they cannot do the same work all their life, especially when it's, for example, in the operations, for example. So we have to rethink all jobs and jobs conditions. And I would say that companies will experience demographic pressure. You mentioned before. Companies will have to anticipate really the demographic impact by 2040. And we have other statistics in France that were published by the National Statistic Company in France. And we see that the trend would be that the active population will continue to grow over the next 2 decades, but at a slower pace as well. And the trend would reverse sharply from 2040. So it's only 2040, it's not far away. And the annual average decrease would be 50,000 active individual per year until 2070. So we might, or you might think you have time to deal with it, but we may not, and we may set up some measures, or at least anticipate. And I would say that this trend is not only French, but that will happen everywhere across Europe. So that will maybe amplify the phenomenon of this attrition of demographic pressure.
Sure. No, very, very interesting, and I think those are very pertinent points in the sense that there's always this hard stop. Well, I've reached my retirement age, hard stop,
Yes.
but there's not that future focus. And I think there are differing views, of course, on this, and I think there are elements that maybe have a different thought process. Edgar, from the Swiss perspective, how do you see this?
Yes, I think many companies offer preparing for retirement programs. So I'm convinced this program should include planning to continue to work. That should be as well a working planning program with some question as which tasks, which topics, and to what extent employees want to continue working with their own employer or elsewhere. We should prove much more flexibility in these topics, employers and employees as well. In Switzerland, the retirement age is 65 for men and until the year 2028 also for women. But there is a time corridor between about 60 and 70 during which people can retire in Switzerland. However, the employers still tend to use the age 65 as a benchmark, and they see, it's very interesting for the culture in Switzerland, they see this as a government recommendation to send people into entire retirement. And we should break that limit in the interest for the employees, but also because of the demographic change, in the interest of the employers, of the companies.
No, absolutely. And I think it also goes to our third point, which we'll talk about afterwards, which I think also is maybe a pertinent topic as well. John, what about from your perspective?
Well, it's very different in the UK. So for my age group, state retirement, as in receiving a state pension, is age 67. For younger workers, it'll be 68. And outside of the public sector workers, final salary pension schemes are largely finished. So you are reliant on how much money you have saved in your company pension scheme or your personal pension scheme. So retirement before 67 is very much a question of affordability. And it's also, due to recent changes in regulations, quite difficult to have a conversation with workers about retirement. I think actually ageist policies work against people in this. So in the attempt to be equal, we're actually being unequal because it inhibits a proper conversation about retirement with workers who might even want to retire. You're not even allowed to suggest it or talk about it effectively or initiate that conversation. Clearly the people who are HR professionals on the call will know much more about it than me, but as a manager, it's very difficult to have that conversation. It's also very difficult to have that conversation as a worker. But regardless of that, if you're 55, you've seriously got to think about what the next 13 years of work could hold for you. The likelihood is you don't want to give up work. Most people don't want to have a sort of old-fashioned retirement where the day after they leave work, they are retired. They want something different, something perhaps a bit more fulfilling. They might want to scratch that itch that they had earlier in their career. For example, for me, I want to be more entrepreneurial. I'm in a position to accept the risks of being entrepreneurial much more than I was when I had a young family to support, for example. So I think that retirement ages are going to rise, whether the public realize that or not, or whether workers realize that or not. But it is unaffordable for any country in Europe to fund early 60s retirement anymore. They will simply go bust as nations. So I think we have to accept that retirement is something that we should talk about, really, and something that we should be funding for ourselves as well.
No, sure. I think very pertinent. All those three points of view also come into line, and I think one of the things that we see as well, and you just touched upon it as well, John, is the fact that the affordability piece for governments, particularly in pension schemes, and with the demographic shift that we've had, the only thing that's going to happen is that as we don't have enough youngsters coming into the workforce, and obviously then propelling that effectively the pension scheme and the pension systems, this has an impact for everyone.
I mean, I was an economist at university and working as an economist in the early 90s, and this was being discussed then. It's the conversation has not moved on.
Indeed. It's probably sandwiching itself even closer now. So that's one of the things happening. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, which I think actually follows quite nicely a line into the generational management piece. So maybe let's start with you, Edgar. Yeah, from this perspective and the point of view of the study, but also your own point of view within Switzerland as well on this.
Okay. So let me give you an example why generational management is so important. It's an example from a study, but also from a study done in Switzerland. It shows that young managers assess older applicants much more critically than older managers, and that younger managers in particular think that older employees would rather retire sooner than later. And those employees who want to work longer often do not say it within the company, but would like to be asked by the company. But if they are, because the younger think differently, they don't ask. So that's a lack of discussion. And that's the reason why generational management reflecting on stereotypes would be so important. And in this way, companies could get also much more open to hire older applicants and to promote older employees. It's really a question of mindset. And to change this mindset, the cultural work of generational management would be key.
Interesting. No, it's a really interesting point of view, and I think it sort of touches on the point of you know, the fact that we have 4 generations in the workforce today. So there is an impact there, and you know what works best with certain aspects, and I think organizations have probably forgotten a little bit about that those elements and how those 4 generations interact with each other, yeah, in the same actual teams or in the same type of workplace. But John, what from your perspective, how do you see that from the UK perspective?
Well, it's not without challenges working in a multi-generational environment. Often, sometimes in my age group, working with people who are younger than your own children, as a good way of putting it. People do work in different styles, but in the same way that we all have something to give. But I agree very much about these stereotypes being completely incorrect. So in the UK, I think you're not allowed to put the word enthusiastic into a job advert in case that is perceived as being ageist. I think the actual perception of that is more ageist than putting it into a job advert. Because in my line of work, you're potentially more likely to find enthusiastic older people than you are younger people. I think that might be a contentious thing to say, but I think it's probably true. Again, technology is another one. Speaking as somebody who I'm not a technologist, but have always worked with a great deal of technology. I'm in the sort of analytical and data-rich sort of area in financial services. I'm talking about AI and how it can be deployed in the workplace on a daily basis. I don't think that technology skills is something you cannot expect from older workers, perhaps of the generation before me, who in the workplace. But again, I think I know good examples of people in that generation who are still in work in their 70s and are still at the forefront of technology. So I think a lot of the stereotypes are completely wrong about older versus younger workers. And really, it's about finding a way to work together. But again, I think it's wrong to expect older workers to just join and do the same roles as younger workers. I think they can interact in a better way, given better roles, more advisory roles, often part-time roles, consultancy type roles, as well as interim. For example, if you're an older worker, you can come in as an interim to support somebody, for example, is on maternity leave very easily, because you can pick up that role with your broader experience much more quickly. And again, those roles are tend not to be on a career path, so you're not inhibiting somebody's career growth beneath you. So there are plenty of ways in this sort of interim or fractional type work where older workers can interact with younger workers. But I think expecting them to just slot in and sit side by side with somebody who has no understanding, mutual understanding of the world that we grew up in compared to the world they grew up in is slightly naive as well.
Sure. No, very interesting point, and I think that nice correlation between organizations also have to think about this, I think, in a much more holistic fashion as well, to take on board that you can't have an expectation of just slotting somebody into a role when actually that needs to be maybe more developed, or as you said, the fractional, the interim management type of aspect, or more on a consulting type basis, particularly, and mentoring as well to a degree, I think, within organizations.
It potentially adds a lot of flexibility to the cost base from a manager's perspective. Whereas hiring people is a big cost to the business, but it's also a very inflexible cost. Whereas adding to the workforce in a more flexible way could help companies manage their costs better as well.
Indeed. Audrey, from your perspective in France, how do you see that? How do you see the generational management piece?
Yeah, is it in France or somewhere else?
Europe.
But I would say that yes, I think we should see it as an opportunity to have different people from different generation in the same, let's say, team or function or department, because it enables the knowledge transfer. And we have this issue in the different companies that we see. How do we ensure that all these knowledge which are not always formally documented or with process written, that this knowledge is properly transferred to the younger generation. So this is very important to ensure this this transfer of knowledge. So I think this is the advantage of these different generations. So like you told Olivier, 4 generation in one company. So yes, that can enables that. And after, yes, I totally agree, John, with you. What we see in France is that we usually hire some interim managers in some jobs requiring real expertise on some functions. So this is really a big issue, and it's key in some companies to hire some older people that have the expertise and the knowledge for some projects.
Especially with deep change management, big projects where you need to backfill people in their current roles to enable them to do more. I agree, very much so.
No, perfect. I think that gives a nice rounded view on those elements. And I think that what's interesting is we have we obviously have another 5 minutes to go, so on this LinkedIn Live. What I wanted to see is firstly, do we have any questions from the audience at all? I'm not sure if anybody has actually put anything in as yet. No, I don't see anything coming up, so I presume not. So you're all a bit shy today. That's fine, no problems at all. You can ask your questions obviously afterwards as well. We'll always answer them after this event, so you're quite free to use the comments section as well. And it's good to get your viewpoints. We'll also share the study as well with everyone on that comment, which I'll do after this LinkedIn Live. But what would be interesting from each of you is having seen the study, your own impressions and what we've heard today. What would be your, I would say, one key takeaway that you would give to the audience? Should we start with you, John?
Yeah, I think I was really lucky to work for a company that had a really sort of grown-up, mature approach to what you do afterwards, if you like. And I was able to have a proper conversation, which I then, having decided I wanted to do something different, I was able to have that conversation with 1080 about the next step for me and what I wanted to do in my second career, if you like. I think most people are going to have at least 2 or 3 careers in their lives as working lives get longer, and it's also more challenging for people to get jobs in their younger years, especially straight out of university. So I think having that sort of multi-career view and having an honest conversation about it with your managers, with the leadership in your own firm, but also with other people is probably the number one thing for me.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Audrey.
Yes, maybe a different angle, but I would say that companies should consider activating or maybe reactivating their workforce planning programs just to ensure that they anticipate the challenges and the needs, considering the demographic trends ahead of us, and to anticipate the measures and the policies to set up to ensure that they will have the right people in the right place with the right skills when needed.
Excellent. Thank you, Audrey. And Edgar.
I absolutely agree with Audrey, because demographic change will stay for the next 20 or 25 years. And I see that many companies are not prepared for it. So, in my opinion, the trend of the demographic change and how companies deal with it should be a central element of corporate strategy and the HR strategy as well. And companies should consider how to adapt their recruitment, talent management, retirement processes, all the key processes of HR management in order to have enough qualified employees in the future and to be really prepared for the future.
Fantastic. So, in essence, I think what we're saying is that there's a big mindset shift, I think, that needs to happen in the global workforce that we have, and actually in the European, if we take the European workforce, the mindset of organizations and the change that organizations probably need to think differently about, firstly, the generational management piece, but also how people want to work, and particularly the 55 plus workers. I think your point, John, changing a little bit, allowing more flexibility, and using those individuals at key points in the organization's sort of trajectories as well, because they bring an essence to the organization, an experience, and they can also help the younger generation also to maybe progress as well across the board. So I think we've covered all those different angles, and I think that's fantastic. So I don't know if there's any. We've got a couple of minutes left. Just wanted to see if there is a question or anybody has put a question in. I don't see anything in there. So I think, unless of course there's additional points, but ultimately, from my perspective, I'd like to thank you all, and I'd like to thank my esteemed panel, John, Audrey, Edgar, for joining us today. I hope this topic's been useful, and as I say, we'll share this study in the comments section, and you'll also receive, those that obviously registered for the LinkedIn Live will also receive this study as well. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.